Kelly Jackson. Let's talk about the Enneagram and what this means. What we're going to cover today is, So Kelly said I should spend a little more time introducing ourselves. So we have been Christians since we were younger in high school. We've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to live out the Christian life. We've been in Bible studies forever, gone to church forever, and some of the things that we've learned about more recently are things like the Enneagram that help you understand your own personality. And we'll talk a little bit more about why that's so important and what you can do with that. But we also did some other courses. One of them is called Faith Walking. It's an organization out of Texas that helps you look at your family of origin and your first spiritual formations. And that really has launched us on a trajectory of really kind of growing more personally than we feel like we have in almost any other experience in our life. So we love this material. We think it's just like what Regan said earlier, it's a great tool to add to your toolkit. And there's a lot of experience you'll have to have with it to get good at using these tools. But it's a great tool. We think the Enneagram is something that, honestly, if you understand yourself better, it impacts every relationship in your life, hands down. So you taking the time to know yourself, a little bit about what Dr. Braley said in the last session, is really important, and that's what this Enneagram will help us do. So what we're planning to go over today is just why we use the Enneagram, what does Scripture say about the relational life, what is the Enneagram, and then we're going to do a quick 2-question test that will help you kind of get a sense of what your personality type is. And then we have some handouts we'll pass around for that personality test, and we have some follow-up after that to kind of help you understand what your personality type is. And then from there we'll talk about how do you apply this and what resources you can use to kind of further your knowledge and use of the Enneagram. So is anyone already familiar with the Enneagram? Okay, great. And you know your type and you've used it. Any great experience with that, or any good comments you'd have for other people here today?
It's great for making teams.
It's great for what?
Making teams, putting teams together.
We have 6 different numbers in our house. It's been really interesting to help parents to figure out how to talk to my 7 is very different than how I talk to my 1.
Beautiful. Love that. Exactly. Anybody else?
It's not really, I think it's a good thing, but learning what I would like to do, like don't necessarily do, has opened my eyes. You can tell I'm not, I just don't have time.
Okay, great. Thank you. So we'll start with why do we use the Enneagram and where does this fit in? So back from Regan's sermon on Labor Day, we talked about how we can take the gospel worldview and apply it in different areas of our life. So this one, the relational life, it really impacts the top circle, social, relational. It impacts your emotional health, and it can also impact your intellectual and beliefs. And this really we'll talk about this a little bit more, but so there's 3 areas that this Enneagram can have a pretty big impact on, so it's really important to spend the time understanding this. And then the next slide that Regan talked about is kind of those pillars of influence. Like once you have that experience in your life where you're applying these emotional things that you've learned about yourself, what does it impact? It impacts all these different pillars, the 7 mountains: religion, education, business, government, family, arts, and media. But the truth of it is, you are you, and you impact all the relationships in your life all the time. So knowing more about ourselves is really important. Why do we use the Enneagram? So in any relationship that we have today, whether it's your family, your spouse, neighbors, co-workers, children, grandchildren, parents, on and on, we all bring one thing in common to those relationships, and that's ourselves. So taking a little more time to understand what we do well or not so well, and really getting some handles on how can we understand ourselves and why is our personality like this, and then how do I relate to other people, it's super, super helpful. So in the Serenity Prayer, it says, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. So I'm sure you've heard that before, and why that's so important is because the hardest thing to change is probably ourselves. Is to say, I know we all have family members that are maybe that old curmudgeon that they're never going to change. You can't talk to them about 15 things because you'll set them off, and it's just, it always ruins the family gatherings or whatever it is. This thing about changing us is some of the hardest work that we can do. But if we take the time to understand, give ourselves some tools and understanding, it's not so hard. So a couple scriptures that kind of help us orient to the relational life are the greatest commandment in Matthew 22, 34 through 40. I'm just going to read this part from 37 on. It says, Jesus replied, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So this thing of loving yourself is actually the launching point for every relationship in your life. Because if you don't love yourself well, then it becomes a limiting factor. It's almost like a throttle. So if you know how a camera lens can open all the way to the aperture, or it can close down. If we don't love ourselves well, it is like we have closed down the aperture of our ability to be accessible to other people, or other people to be able to access us. We have limited how much access we give to other people. So loving yourself well is so important, and I think for me, my testimony around this is I know my type. I'm the reformer type, which is called the one type. It's a perfectionist. And so as a believer, when I was much younger, I kept thinking, how come I'm not seeing as much internal change in my heart as I'd like? Why do I still have these thought patterns or these other things? And I became really harsh on myself. It's like, I just got to pray more, I got to do this, I got to do all these different things. And what I found out from this much later is that the reformer has a very harsh inner monologue. And that harsh inner monologue says, you're never good enough, you can't do it. And what it made me do is it caused me to shrink back from wanting to share myself or have as many friends or commit to other things, because I thought there's something wrong with me. I'm really broken and I can't get past this. But understanding now that that harsh inner monologue is part of the one type, I was like, oh, it totally makes sense. But I still have to work on it and figure out, how do I take every thought captive? How do I turn that around so that I'm not focused on the negative things, and now I want to focus on the positive things? So that's what I think loving yourself well is about. We have to figure out how to turn that around. So then Proverbs 4:23 says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So understanding yourself well, understanding when you're in a healthy place or an unhealthy place, how you're managing your anxiety is really important. And then Proverbs 25, the purposes of a person's heart are deep waters, but one who has insight draws them out. So that's what we're trying to do. We're we're trying to give ourselves some insight on what our personality type is. So those are a couple scriptures about the relational life. What is the Enneagram? So the Enneagram is a symbol, and it's made up of 3 parts. So they represent, on the right side of the screen, you see the circle is wholeness. The triangle represents the Trinity. And the bottom one represents the law of 7, or it's about nothing remains static, everything is changing. And outside of that curmudgeon type relative that we have, everything is changing all the time, and faster and faster. So this symbol was developed quite a few years ago, and it's kind of stuck with the Enneagram ever since. But what you can see here are the 9 types of the personality types, around from 1 all the way to 9: reformer, helper, achiever, individualist, investigation, loyalist, enthusiast, challenger, and peacemaker. We'll talk about a number of resources you can use in the future in terms of how you can learn more. A lot of the different organizations will have slightly different names for those, so don't be bothered by that. But where did this information come from? The Enneagram started, some of the earliest kind of personality type information gathering was, they could pin it back to Persia in 2500 BC. So over thousands of years, this material has developed, and these personality types have been kind of cultivated, if you will, to be these 9 types. Very significant additions to this systematic kind of view of the personality types was added by the Christian mystics after Christ, and then it really gained some traction in about 1850 is when it started really taking off and being formalized a little bit more. We were talking with Dr. Braley just before everything started this morning, and he said, that's really interesting stuff. He goes, I love that you've got some tools that you can help people understand their personality types, because I wish we would have learned that, while we were doing all of our psychological studies. But he didn't have that experience, so he was interested in what we were talking about today. Any questions so far on the Enneagram, these personality types? Okay, so we're going to switch over and do the test now, and Kelly is going to lead us through the testing part. So we have a 2-question test. I'll pass some handouts out for you so you can take this test.
All right, I'm a type 6, and I'm a loyalist, so that has really served me well, and it also can be a huge crutch for me because I tend to stay in relationships or jobs or situations too long, or I don't say what I need very well. So that's where, a type 6 has been a strength for me, but a weakness. I'm also a 3, so I'm an overachiever, and which makes me a little more perfectionistic. So 2 perfectionists married over 30 years, we've got some pain that we've worked through. So when you're taking this test, Greg and I are huge overthinkers. This is not a test to overthink. You want to just kind of go with your gut. So this that you're taking today, it comes from the book that we're going to share with you, which is our favorite book on the Enneagram. It's not the only book on the Enneagram. And it's about 70% accurate. I will tell you, it probably took me 2 years of testing to figure out what I am, because I'm also a former school teacher, and I taught special ed, and I can relate to all different people. So every time I would take the longer tests, which tend to be like 25 questions or something, I kept getting different personality types. And it just really took me a long time to figure out where I show up in times of anxiety and how I show up when I'm not healthy, to really identify, yeah, I'm a 6 and a 3, and they play off each other really well for me. So what I want you to do is, you have 2 sections. You have group 1 and group 2. you're going to mark one answer for each section. So group 1 can have an answer of A, B, or C. Group 2 can have an answer of X, Y, or Z. You don't want to overanalyze. Like I said, go with your gut. If you can't decide between 2 choices in one group, you can have 2 choices in one group, but not 2 choices in both groups. You don't want to end up with 4 choices. That's going to be really confusing for you. So, you know, you may think about, what would my best friend say? Or how do my kids experience me? How does my spouse experience me? If you're trying to figure out where you might land. So I'll give you a few minutes to think about it.
So we'll give you 5 minutes.
5 minutes? Okay. We need some fun music or, I don't know, dancing bears or something like that.
This is a screenshot, so just search engine. Yeah.
Looks like most of you are still thinking. Maybe overanalyzing if you're a 1. Give you a couple more minutes. I never like taking tests like this because I don't like to pin myself down to one answer or 2 answers. If you're feeling ready, can you give me a thumbs up? Okay. The majority of us are ready to go, so we're going to go on to the next slide. This is interpreting the test. Remember, this is just a tool and a guideline. You may end up finding that you're a different type than where you landed today. So, if you look at your 2-digit code, you're comparing group 1 and group 2. If you landed with an AX, type 7, you're an enthusiast. You tend to be upbeat, accomplished, impulsive. Of course, these key characteristics are mainly You'll notice upbeat, accomplished seems a little more positive than impulsive. So impulsive might be where you go if you're in an unhealthy place in your life. And we're actually going to look at each type and where they are in different levels of health here in a moment. Okay. AY is an 8. You're a challenger, self-confident, decisive, domineering. You might be a rager. You may be the person that is most willing to debate loudly with everyone. AZ, a 3, the achiever, adaptable, ambitious, and image conscious. That's a lot of where my 3 comes in. I was raised in Texas, and it was all about image, and especially when I went to church. You know, you had to have everything on correctly and all buttoned up, and that was a hard place for me because a 3 is an unhealthy place for my personality type. Took me a while to get over that. At BX is a peacemaker, number 9. Receptive, reassuring, can become complacent, can become in a place where you're apathetic. BY4, individualist, intuitive, aesthetic, self-absorbed. BZ is a 5, the investigator, perceptive, innovative, detached. CX is a 2, the helper, caring, generous, possessive. I'll talk about what Greg just handed out here in a moment, if you could just set those down for a second. CY is a 6, the loyalist, engaging, responsible, defensive. And CZ is a number 1, the reformer, relational, preoccupied, self-controlled, very controlled by principles and rules and what's right and justice. So, as we read through this, do you feel like you connected with a personality type in particular? It may feel confusing. It may be like, yeah, that's not me. You're like spot on. Yeah. Okay. So before we look at what Greg passed out, I just wanted to go over, this is just another couple of slides to help you feel like yeah, this is me. I'm identifying with this type. Or, I'm not so sure. You can be more than one type, by the way. And we didn't talk about wings and places of disintegration and all of that, but as you get into the Enneagram, you'll find you might be a 1, but you lean towards another type, you know, depending on where you are in your life. That's super common. So basic fears of these types, I personally can relate to this as a 3 and a 6, being worthless or without value and being without support or guidance. Being a 6, it's really easy for me to have a faith because actually as a 6, when you're unhealthy, you go towards really strong beliefs. And so for me personally, it's made me, I have a very strong faith, and I kind of always have. I just believe because I believe. And I never really questioned my faith. But I also realize I have to be careful in that and not, and just keep it all in perspective, I guess I'll say. So here are the basic fears. I don't feel like I need to go through all of them. I'm just giving you a little bit of time to absorb it and look at maybe where you fell and where you're feeling about yourself.
Question. Can you explain a little more?
Yeah, Greg asked if I could explain a little bit about the wings. One thing, you know, Regan said is that we were all experts in our field. I am not an expert in the Enneagram. This is just a tool I find helpful. A wing is, for instance, when you look back at this image here, a peacemaker can have a 1 wing or an 8 wing. So as a peacemaker, you may go towards the reformer, you may go towards perfectionism, or you may lean more towards being a challenger. So you can be a peacemaker and a challenger at the same time. And as you get further into the Enneagram, that is something that you could research and study how your wings work. Like I said, we're going to look at healthy, average, and unhealthy areas of ourselves, and those are kind of some red flags when you're moving towards areas of being unhealthy. For those of you who are really versed in the Enneagram, is there anything else you would like to add about a wing, or maybe your understanding that's a little bit better than mine? Or where it's been helpful for you?
I think for me, I'm a 2, and I can see where I can lean towards a 1 in some circumstances, and lean towards a 3 in other circumstances. When the social side of being a 3 comes out in hospitality in the way that I can actually, as an introvert, come with that switch to be that person for someone, but that's not where I'm comfortable. It's kind of you think of like training wheels. You kind of have your 2 that I'm sitting in, and sometimes I bounce on that 3 for a little while, and then I'll bounce on the 2 on the 1, but I predominantly have that number that I sit on.
That's an excellent point. And I love how you said, because I'm an introvert too. I can be a pretty intense introvert, but yet I can rise to the occasion and post and all of those things. But the consequence for me is it doesn't feed me; it takes from me. So I have to be careful with that. That's a really good example. Thank you.
Question: the wings are what's to the left and right of your name number?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And I'll add, we did not make a slide of this because we were really just trying to give you food for thought for you to say, hey, I'm going to go check this out. This is the book that Greg and I like the most. I mean, there's tons of in this, and you will have a list of resources. They're actually on the back of your test that you just took. Okay. This book is our favorite. It's a little more scientific. It's a little more, I guess, detailed and a lot of history, but it explains all the different ways that the Enneagram can play out. And there's also an area of I think it's called disintegration, where you move towards a number when you're unhealthy. For instance, if you look at the 6 is connected to the 9 and the 3. In a healthy place, I can move towards being a peacemaker. So my 6 can move towards a 9 in a healthy spot. But when I'm starting to get more unhealthy, I move towards the achiever. And then that's where I can become competitive, and I can seem arrogant, and I can be very aloof, especially being an introvert. So when I see these parts of myself coming out, I'm like, ooh, I'm moving towards a 3. And that doesn't mean that a 3 is that person. It just means as a 6 towards a 3, it becomes an unhealthy place for me. And as you study the Enneagram a little more, you'll learn more about that. Is that helpful? The answer. Any other questions there at this time?
So why is peacemaker positive?
It's
healthier and
it's just the type as a loyalist. If I'm in an unhealthy place and I become much more achievement oriented, it can mix with my personality and just make it in an unhealthy place. We will
just become more complacent.
more complacent. Is that
That's a negative word?
Yeah, it can be. Mm-hmm. And we'll go over that in just a second. Thank you for that question. So we talked about basic fears. This is basic desires and distortions. For instance, it did not, I'm sorry. There you go. As a 6, I want to be secure. And like I said before, I can deteriorate into attachment of beliefs, a belief system, which could be unhealthy. As a 1, a big thing for Greg always has been integrity and principles and morals and rules. but that can become critical and perfectionistic, especially when you're parenting children who are not your type. So I wanted to show you this table just again to see if, okay, yes, I can see myself here, as I'm looking at the type that the test told me I was. Maybe you can relate to this a little bit. Any questions about this so far? So the next thing we're going to look at, actually Greg put these on your table. This is an example of the chart where, so you have one for each type. I'm sorry, we didn't know how many people to expect, so I just made a copy, 3 copies of 1, 3 copies of 2, that kind of thing. So you have an example in your table of this chart. Yours is not in color, but you should have each type, 1 through 9. So maybe it'd be helpful to, if you've got 3 1s at your table, you have a question? We don't have that chart. I think it might be on the other side. There you go.
We have a slide. I just took a picture.
No, this one.
You don't have this slide.
Oh.
But you do have the healthy and unhealthy version of type 6. I made this to be a little more visual because, and this is also abbreviated. Yours that you have in your hand looks a lot longer. I just did quick bullet points, and this is just one example. So as a type 6, and each type has 3 different areas of health and its level. So for instance, and this is just how the Enneagram words it, but if I'm healthy, level 1, that's like the most healthy I can possibly be. And I'm self-reliant, courageous. I tend to be really secure with myself, well-grounded, serene, valiant. But if you notice, down in the average range, and I colored these because as you move down into yellow and red, those are for me cautious areas where if I realize I'm entering into the yellow or red, I have to say, what is creating anxiety for me? Or why am I reacting this way? So let's just look at average level 6. If I'm in the average range of health, but I am moving into level 6, I might be very authoritarian and blaming. I have fear that I'm losing support of my allies, my coworkers, my friends maybe. I start feeling unsure of myself. My inner monologue will start telling me lies that people are against me, or I've done something wrong that I don't even know. For me, that's a huge thing. If I do something that or I don't do something and I get blamed for something, there's a justice piece that comes up for me. And then I begin to blame others and look outside myself in a panicky kind of way. And so for me personally, knowing self and knowing this tool, it helps me to say, oh, wait a minute, what is creating this situation for me and why am I reacting this way? As a married couple, and because we both have done all of this work, we both have this language, sometimes we can say, hey, you are behaving as an unhealthy part of your personality, so can you help me figure out what's going on? How can I support you? What do you need in your life? Why are you feeling so fearful? Or why are you becoming so rule-oriented is what I might ask Greg. And so I thought this might be helpful for each of you to just kind of read through a little bit of the personality type that you feel like you might be identifying with, and where are some areas that make sense to you. So I thought I'd give you a couple of minutes maybe to talk to your friends and neighbors at your table. And I also want to say, if you feel like after this talk, if you want more copies of what we brought, happy to run and make some copies for you. So go ahead and visit amongst yourselves for a little bit.
fit a 7? Yeah. That's like 7. I just
If I
asked
were
him
to,
to
yeah, I was kind of walking to,
I try to get him off the hair that says that's right.
I think I'm like
Begin to
Julie.
fear that they're missing out
I'm a
on other
reformer and then
experiences.
Yep.
As they become restless and interested in having more and more options available.
And when you,
They stay busy
I guess
with many
I
different
come out
tasks
of
and
8.
to try to keep up.
I haven't figured out the other one,
He
but
always tells me.
third oldest of 12, I guess that kind of is, I tell him, I want things done quickly, efficiently, and I have a feeling my husband's the same.
coworkers like that. Everything is, it has to be done. That's kind of keep in mind here, like, Christy, if everything's important, nothing's important.
Yes.
If everything's urgent, nothing's urgent. If everything's critical, you know, it has to be that. So everything can't live and die on, you know, on every hill.
Yep.
We did a marriage convention and talked about someone spouses that had problems with their, it's really bad if you're both the same.
Yeah. Well, we both we're in healthcare and management, and so everything is always passed down to you guys. And it's like, no, this can't be, you know, so me as a challenger would pick out the most important. So it could be used, but still.
I was
Like with
All right, super fun conversations. Let's go ahead and bring it back. So one thing I think is really important to think about is transformation. I mean, as Christians, and you know, really what God has for us, as Greg read the scripture earlier, to love your neighbor as yourself. We have to learn to love ourselves in order to be open to God's will in our lives and the transformative power that He can have in our lives. And so, as you're looking at this tool, and especially the levels of development, it's a really good place to set goals for yourself. Here we are in January, you know, and you can look at that and say, all right, I am at work, I'm operating in this area of my personality, but at home, maybe, I'm operating over here, and then with my kids, sometimes I can be really unhealthy when it comes to interacting with my kids. And there are people in our lives that are super triggering. So where are some areas maybe that you could set a goal or two for yourself for growth, and remember to pray for yourself. God honors that when we pray for ourselves. We pray for others, but also interceding for ourselves. And this actually leads to, if you look at the level of development, you flip it over. There's a small chart that says an invitation to abundance on the back. I feel like this is a really important chart that we have in this book, because in my mind, this is kind of who God created us to be, right? In a beautiful place. These are the areas to focus on and what He has for you in your personality type. So the invitation as a type 1 is to live for a higher purpose, that area of justice. And remembering that it's your true nature to be wise and discerning. And it's okay to be wise and discerning. We don't have to apologize for who we are. If you're a type 2, your invitation is to nurture yourself and to nurture others and to really live in that and enjoy it. It's your nature to be good to yourself and to have goodwill and compassion for others. So I love this on the back of the other. Because I think it's a good reminder of, all right, God, who did you create me to be? Where am I not living into that? And what's next? Greg mentioned, I believe, faith walking earlier. I believe now it's called emotionally healthy spirituality, is what they kind of changed the name to. It is a course, very long course, but it's a course in really transformation. Some people at first were calling it discipleship. It's not discipleship. It's really personal transformation. Who did God create me to be? Where have I gotten stuck in life along the way? How has that changed my way of thinking and my way of being? How can I get back to the beauty of God's creation in myself? And that's what going through faith walking has really helped us to get to that point. So anytime you have a chance for maybe spiritual direction, that could be your next steps. And Greg's going to talk a little bit more about that. Any questions about this invitation to abundance or the levels of development? So now we're going to talk about how to apply. I kind of scratched the surface on that a little bit.
So Kelly did cover a couple things about transformation and how we can use this tool, obviously for personal growth. There's a couple things that you can do to get into action on this particular thing using the Enneagram. And so there's some questions that you can ask other people who know you well as you kind of have a sense of what these healthy, average, and unhealthy ways of being are for you. You can ask other people, how do you experience me? Do you experience me like this? As this kind of level of my personality type? Is it a healthy or is it unhealthy? And it can be a really tough question to ask. One of the things that is so important about this space of transformation is asking God to help us make these changes. It's one of the most powerful testimonies that you have. When people see a transformed life, that they see you moving from one level of health to another level, and they see that you are loving yourself well, that actually causes people to stop and ask questions like, what's happening with you? Can you tell me more about that? Like, to see people really change, and change even the way you respond to other people that you may not respond to well or whatever, it is the most eye-catching thing, and it will often convict them. It's a great witness to just say, I want to show up better. I want to be different in these relationships. I want to feel like I have something to give. I want to be in these healthy places, and other people can relate to me in these healthy aspects of my personality type. So I think there's, Kelly and I have been doing this work for a while, and I think some of the best testimony we've gotten back from this is from our own children. So Mark Twain says, when I was 18, my dad was a fool, but by the time I turned 25, I can't believe how much wisdom he gained. So our kids are like that when they're younger. They're trying to figure it out, and all of a sudden they go, oh, Mom and Dad, you know something. But our kids have said to us, both of our daughters have said, we have a lot of friends, and we don't have any other friends that have parents that are working this hard on being better, being a better person. And for them to say that and call that out has been probably the biggest compliment we can get from any of this, is just the fact that we are staying at it, we're trying to figure it out, we're trying to show up better. When we feel, so like Kelly was talking earlier about, one of the things that you'll see in this book, and there's others, there are plenty of others besides this one, but when you are in a place of anxiousness whatever that situation is, whether it's a person or an event or something else, you will move towards some of the unhealthy traits. And it can happen really fast. You might be operating at like a level 2 or 3 and you're doing great all the time. One thing happens, you can be down to a 6 that fast. And it may only be that one event. But like having in your dashboard of your mind, what just happened there? Why did that happen? And really stopping. I mean, even if you have to say to the person you're talking to, just a minute. And like, what just transpired that caused you to shift that far, that fast? What was that? It's this place of taking every thought captive. And I don't think I could ever take every thought captive. I always seem to have way more thoughts than what I can possibly manage. But this fact of taking that and saying, I just responded in a way that I don't want, and I don't want to show up that way for this person that I care about. It might even be the thing where you just have to say, I need to apologize. I just noticed I did something that I was not intending to. And I don't know why I got triggered. I need to think about that. But I want to apologize right there and just say, what I would have rather said is this. I would rather speak into your life this way, or I would rather show up for you this way. That means a lot to everybody, and that shows you're taking time to take care of yourself, to know yourself, because it impacts everybody around you. It's very important that you don't minimize that. There are times at work that I've done that, and it's caught people off guard when I've stopped and I said, you know what, I didn't handle that well. I'd just like to apologize. Could we do that again? Could we do this? And they're like, well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. And then it just increases their respect for you because you're trying to take good care of them and make that relationship important. So loving your neighbor as yourself, to love your neighbor well, we do have to take care of ourselves and love ourselves well. So this thing of asking questions of how do other people experience you, and then also we talked about anxiety and the ways of being. What is your default? Where do you go when you get anxious? It's really important to start turning that around. Even if you catch yourself like midstream, you go like, I know I'm going to handle this bad. Somebody just said something very triggering to me. Take that pause and say, Lord, I have set for myself, I want to show up this way. Can you help me show up this way? Make that quick prayer inside. Just say, Lord, I want to show up as a healthy person right here, even though I feel triggered, I feel anxious and out of control. So, a couple things we have on the back of your test. We have the website resources. The only ones that I would call out are truly on number 2. Over 1 million tests have been taken in the last 30 days. It is a 70-question test. So if you want to have a more precise understanding, I recommend Truly as the website. Truity, sorry. And then number 3, the Enneagram Coach. There are tons of smartphone apps for the Enneagram, but this couple, Beth and Jeff, they are Christians, and they really help match all the work that they're doing and how they're kind of orienting the Enneagram to Scripture and biblical living. And then we have a number of book resources here. The Wisdom of the Enneagram, there's really quite a few. And some of the really good ones, the second bullet there is, are you my type, am I yours? This really helps for interpersonal relationships. So for friendships, spouses, family members, it really helps you understand how to work well with a personality type that might be different than yours.
There's also a lot of graphic illustrations of the different personality types.
And the Are You My Type and Am I Yours? The Wisdom of the Enneagram is the big fat book that we like, but there are so many others that are a little more relational, a little more tangible, and a little more visual. So I encourage you to go to the bookstore or the library and figure out what you connect with the Enneagram.
And take a look at everybody in here. Ask each other how you're doing, what is working for you, what have you looked into, how are you applying these tools. It's worth the question. Okay? Just to say, this is your test group. How can we help each other in doing this work of loving ourselves better? All right. Oh yeah, so out of curiosity, we just want to see who's got what's the most percentage. Who's a 1? Only one other 1, bless you.
It's okay.
There's a 2. We got a bunch of 2s. Wow, that's probably the highest group. Okay, 3s. 4s. 4. 5. Most of my friends are 5s, actually. It's pretty interesting. 6s. 7s. 2 7s. 8s. 2 8s. Awesome. And 9s. 9s. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Hope this is good news for you. If you want us to make any other copies so that you can take something with you, we'd be glad to do that.